Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Monday, June 29th, 2026. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Situda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. In today's episode, in our box office segment, we'll hear from Variety's Jack Dunn on a less than sky-high debut for Warner Brothers' Supergirl. Toy Story 5 and Lionsgate's Michael Jackson biopic, meanwhile, hit notable milestones. And then Variety's Todd Spangler joins me to break down the surprise news from Comcas this morning that it is splitting the company in two. NBC Universal and Sky will become one separately traded company. Comcast Cable and all of its technology will become another separately traded company. Spangler will help us make sense of it all. But before we get to all of that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. This is big news. Early YouTubers Dan and Phil, very well known in the UK, have come out as being in a relationship and they're going back on tour. My one and only son texted me about this at 6 a.m., so you know it's ricocheting around the Gen Z world. Love wins every time. Backrooms is adding on another room. Distributor A24 is putting Kane Parsons' buzzy indie film back in theaters with an extra 15 minutes of footage. It really feels like this movie will be one that defines the transformation of the film business in the roaring 20s of the 21st century. And finally, R.I.P. Clive Davis. He was an incredible force in music for the second half of the 20th century. He was a great interview and a gracious party host. There's a lot of tributes and coverage of his memorial service to be found on Variety.com, just like all of the other stories that I just mentioned. And now it's time for conversations with Variety journalists about news and trends in show business. If it's Monday, we're talking box office. This time with Jack Dunn, the Variety reporter who toils on Weekend for us. Dunn is a gigantic film buff, and he has a strong sense of how titles are resonating with his Gen Z demo. And that means he brings invaluable insights to his job. Jack Dunn, thank you so much for joining me.
Of course, always a pleasure to be here.
Well, it was, again, another busy summer box office weekend. Very busy for movies titled Toy Story 5, not so busy for movies titled Supergirl. Let's start with Supergirl. I know you are a discerning moviegoer, and of course you cover the sector for Variety. So from those two perspectives, what didn't connect here with moviegoers?
Well, I think starting with last year's Superman, that movie cost $225 million, debuted $125 million, and only got to a little bit over 600. So I think the writing was a little bit on the wall for DC and Warner Bros. As much as they were saying that it was a big hit, I think it was a little bit softer than they want. And then a year later, I think a lot of moviegoers, superhero fatigue and remake fatigue and sequel fatigue. This feels like a convergence of those issues. I think people weren't very excited about it. The movie was actually tracking 50 to 55 million, which would still kind of be a soft launch for a movie that costs 175 plus marketing. But I think as the reviews started to come out and the social media buzz started to flare up, it was really, the reviews were kind of middling to bad. And the movie ultimately tanked this weekend with 38 million in North America and 68 million worldwide, which is not good.
It definitely did not connect, especially with that younger end of the audience that they needed to make this an event. They took a gamble in casting an absolute unknown in the role, Amelia Alcock, and certainly understandable because that's a hard role for anybody with an established name to take on because it's Supergirl. In the larger scheme for Warner's, though, this is a speed bump because they have articulated a 10-year plan for DC film. If you're DC Studios, Jack, and you really want to reach your age group, what does DC Studios do?
I think whoever has the gusto to make a superhero movie that feels different than the last 15 years of superhero movies. I mean, DC does have Clayface coming out in October. That movie does seem like it is offering a new lens to superhero genre, given like a body horror, and James Gunn comes from a horror background. I imagine he must be curating a cool vibe, spooky vibe for October, and obviously horror on Backrooms in Succession is super hot right now, so I am really curious to see how they take a superhero story in that direction. I mean, you saw it with Robert Pattinson's The Batman. That definitely was more of a drama, detective, almost procedural film, and obviously everybody loved that. Clayface will be the test of what DC has because I think that's their ace up their sleeve is they're willing to experiment.
Let's turn to happier news. Family films and animation are a good combination for a strong hold in weekend two, and Toy Story certainly held up very, very well in weekend two. Jack, what did it bring in domestically?
So 70 million in the second weekend domestically, which is only about a 55% drop, which is pretty standard at the theater. And the 12 days, it's tracking to about 300 million domestically and just under 600 million globally after just 12 days in theaters. Pixar, I mean, it's definitely been struggling to launch, especially its original properties. So I'm sure all the executives over at Disney and Pixar had last weekend circled on the calendar. And then there's been probably really happy to see this movie perform so well. It's tracking to be the biggest in franchise history, which is a record that belongs to Toy Story 4 at 1.07 billion. So Disney and Pixar have to be happy with this one, especially after some of the ups and downs that they've had in the last couple of years.
Another milestone that Rebecca Rubin, our box office stalwart, tracked for us this weekend is that Michael, Lionsgate Michael Jackson biopic, which was a real sleeper earlier this year at the box office, it has now surpassed Oppenheimer to become the highest grossing biopic of all time.
It's grossed 977 million at the worldwide box office, crossing Oppenheimer, which was 975 million.
Very good news for Lionsgate, which really needed an absolute home run box office hit, and they got it with this one. Well, speaking of Oppenheimer, and the next film from Christopher Nolan is now we're just a little over 2 weeks out. That's the summer movie that I have been most excited to see. Jack, I'm curious, what kind of buzz is this movie generating in your feeds?
And I agree with you, Cynthia. This is my film of the summer. I cannot wait to see it. I mean, I feel like it was announced all the way last summer, even before that. So the hype is definitely real. I think people are excited. I think people are a little tentative. Obviously, Oppenheimer was so big. I think people are like waiting to kind of see. There's been a ton of talk about how Nolan is putting everyone on the sea and the open waters and putting them through this crazy rigmarole. Go up the mountain, down the mountain. You're in sandals. You're in the desert. You're in the jungle. You're in all these places. But I'm super excited.
I have noted Universal has been so creative with the marketing, the teasers. They haven't overdone it, but they've definitely been whetting appetite. It was big in the NBA Finals. There was a lot of Odyssey marketing. There's been some in the World Cup. So they're clearly taking advantage of the big platforms that they have. And, you know, no pressure, right? Oppenheimer grossed almost $1 billion worldwide and nabbed Best Pictures. Jack, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk me through the box office, and I'm very excited for you because after laboring for us on nights and weekends for a long time, you're going to do more enterprise reporting for us, and I'm very excited to see you move into this next chapter.
Thank you, Cynthia. I could not be more excited myself.
And now we turn to business editor Todd Spangler, who explains why Comcast is getting out the meat cleaver to separate the cable division from NBC Universal and Sky. Todd Spangler, not even a day off of a plane coming back from Cannes and Cannes Lion. Thank you so much for rising early today to handle the Comcast NBC Universal news.
Glad to do it. I was on Central European time.
I woke up to it, and my first thought was not shocking, but still didn't expect it this morning. Todd, how do you read this news? What does it mean for the mighty Comcast and the mighty NBC Universal?
I think they looked at everything and they decided that 1 + 1 equals less than 2 in this case. I mean, to boil it down to kind of the industrial logic of it, they think that these companies will be more valuable separately and that they can invest in their individual lines of business. They're different enough at this point that it doesn't make sense to have them glued together.
It's funny because now that I think about it, it's just about 20 years ago that Sumner Redstone surprised everybody by splitting up the two parts of his empire, CBS and Viacom, and then they went on a journey that would bring them back together years later that we have
Yep.
covered intensely. There is a lot of financial engineering going on here, but the Roberts family will still basically control both entities, but they will be separate stocks, correct?
Yeah, that's the idea, that they'll both be publicly traded and, existing Comcast shareholders will get shares in the new spun off NBCU.
And Michael Cavanaugh, who is co-CEO of Comcast right now with Brian Roberts. He's definitely been a rising star there for about 10 years. He will be the sole CEO of NBC Universal, and a name from Comcast past, Michael Angelakis, who was a formerly CFO, will come back, and he will be CEO of the Comcast Cable and Technology Division.
Yeah.
Interesting. The Roberts family keeps their lieutenants very close. They did do a press call this morning. What was the basic vibe? What did you read from Kavanaugh and Angelakis and Roberts about the why of it all? And how did you think Wall Street reacted?
Wall Street thinks this is better to do it than not, apparently. The stock's up in the 7 to 9% range. So maybe not the bump they were hoping for. The questions about why and why now. And really, like literally, Kavanaugh said, we've simply changed our mind that the two businesses are better together. That they'll be able to spread their wings if they're on separate tracks now, with different underlying financial underpinnings, and they'll be able to, quote, go pursue the future growth and value creation on their own terms. Now, so the next question of that is, oh, well, are you guys doing this so that you can look at M&A? And Brian Roberts said, absolutely not. This is not about separating what we built together. It's about positioning these two exceptional businesses to move forward with greater focus, agility, the ability to fully capitalize on the opportunities ahead. Does that mean they're looking at M&A? He said, that's not the point of this, but remember, they made a bid to combine Warner Brothers streaming and studios with parts of the Comcast portfolio, obviously NBC. So they were in the M&A market, and now they're not. One wonders how strongly Brian Roberts stuff protests here.
You're reminding me that there was some speculation early on, like last September, October, when we were in the early innings of the Warner Brothers Discovery chase. There was speculation that would Comcast consider some kind of split like this, because it would have been a tough sell to regulators to have this company be all together. Broadband has been such a red flag for regulators. Comcast is still the country's biggest broadband provider, and that heft for regulators to allow them to bolt on more assets, especially assets in different areas, that's where they're going to say, whoa, this is getting to be too much market share. So there actually was speculation about this. And then even though they didn't get Warner Brothers Discovery, they say, well, this could be a good idea. And as you say, this is all about lifting a stock that has been absolutely underwater for years now.
Yeah,
The
it
market
has
just
not performed the way they want.
it's crazy because their market cap is less than the assets that they own. Like, they own incredible assets, but the market has not been impressed by the stewardship of the company in the last couple of years. There's just no question. And this is a classic case. If the Roberts family did not have that control, we would be hearing all kinds of agita about needing to change leadership and activist investors. And you still might get the activist investor situation. And they did do the Versant spinoff. The Versant folks are off and running and doing their thing. And so it does seem like at a time when their larger competitors are really transforming, Comcast needed to do something. They did buy Sky about 6 years ago, but that hasn't exactly been transformative
No.
for their core Hollywood media business. And Todd, all of this comes too as there have been rumblings about Sky buying some significant assets from the UK's ITV, the studio and streaming arm, which would definitely give them a bigger footprint.
Let me just go back to something you said earlier, Cynthia, about looking at regulatory headwinds. That's a good point about if NBCU wants to look at combining with some other player in the industry, whether it's Netflix or buying, an independent studio or something like that, being separate from the Comcast side of it will definitely help them move that forward. I think the body language here is that Brian Robertson and Mike Kavanaugh, they want to be projecting an image of strength. They're saying, look, we don't have to do M&A, right? That's something they've said over and over, or that's what they publicly told analysts over and over, that they don't see that they have to do M&A. So they're sort of saying, hey, we're open to business without actually saying that. And let me just add, Cynthia, that we haven't even talked specifically about Paramount Warner Brothers Discovery, where David Ellison sees the need to aggregate a bunch of media properties up together to get scale. That's not inconsistent with what Comcast is talking about doing here today. But it just goes to show you that the M&A pendulum is going both ways here.
Todd, thank you so much for rising early to make sense of all this for us.
Thank you, Cynthia.
As we close out today's episode, here's a few things we're watching for. The entire Variety editorial staff is bracing for the celebrity nuptials of the year, a little affair going on at Madison Square Garden on Friday. The BBC comes to Jesus. The BBC has commissioned a 4-part docuseries on the life of Jesus that is targeted to premiere next year. It hails from Wonderhood Studios. We love to hear from our listeners, so please send thoughts, gripes, and other feedback about Daily Variety to podcasts@variety.com. Before we go, congrats to all of the Variety staff members who won Southern California Journalism Awards on Sunday night. Drum roll, please. Our first-place finishers are Jem Oswald, Kate Arthur, Daniel D'Addario, Trish Deitch, Jennifer Dorn, Owen Gleiberman, Salome Hailu, Jennifer Halper, Brett Lang, Richard Phibbs, Naman Ramachandran, Ramin Satuda, Elise Schaefer, Ethan Schanfeld, Brian Steinberg ×2, Aramide Tinubu, and KJ Yosman. Please go to Variety.com to find our story on our Southern California Journalism Award triumphs. They have links to all of this award-winning coverage. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Jack Dunn and Todd Spangler. Stick, snicks, hick, picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice, and don't forget to tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety.